Well, Queen Elizabeth, our Queen, is head of state, not just of the UK, but several Commonwealth countries. Go to Canada, for instance, and you'll see her face on the Canadian $20 bill. But tonight, anyone visiting several Canadian cities will also find images of the monarchy we share acting as a lightning rod for anger over the deaths of Indigenous children. Downing Street today condemning protesters in Winnipeg who hauled down a statue of the Queen. But the PM spokesman chose his words carefully. Our thoughts, he said, are with Canada's Indigenous community following these tragic discoveries. The discoveries are of a mass grave at a residential school where Indigenous children were taken away from their families by the state to be forcibly assimilated into society. From the 1800s onward, an estimated 6,000 children died of disease and neglect at the schools, which were sometimes run by the Catholic Church and others. The latest discovery of bodies came on the eve of Canada Day, the annual celebration on July the 1st that marks the country's creation and unification. Protesters marked the occasion by toppling statues, including one of Captain Cook, which was thrown into a harbour. Half a dozen churches have been set ablaze. Let's turn to Ezra Levant, who's a political activist, broadcaster and founder of Rebel News. He joins us live from Toronto now. Ezra, thanks ever so much for joining us. There are two parts to this story that we need to recognise. I mean, clearly, these protests spring from a place of great fury and anger and presumably grief. But then there's the reaction, or some would describe it, I suppose, as an overreaction in the sense that the rule of law doesn't seem to be working in the way that we've come to expect.
Yeah, I think you fairly accurately described the background here. They weren't mass graves, though. They were just unmarked graves. Over the course of a century, thousands of children did die at these boarding schools, these residential schools, about half of them from tuberculosis. A lot of this was already discovered in what Canada had called a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, modeled after the one after apartheid in South Africa. There was massive reparations paid and an official apology given to Aboriginal people by not only Stephen Harper, the Prime Minister of the day, but Justin Trudeau himself. So there wasn't a lot new that hadn't been talked about and dealt with earlier, other than it's being politically weaponized now. And I hate to say it, Colin, but I think Justin Trudeau bears some of the blame for that. He stripped our founding prime minister off the $10 bill. They've been taking down statues of Sir John A. Macdonald across the country. They're voting to take down the symbols of Canada itself. And so if the government can take down symbols and statues, why can't an angry mob? And I think they're actually trying to destroy the symbols of Canada itself. Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria was another statue that was toppled. And they're attacking any symbols of any church, not just Catholic churches. Every symbol of government, religion, any authority is being attacked. It's much more than just the latest excuse of another discovery of unmarked graves.
I mean, I hope we're going to see some of the pictures. I mean, they're amazing, eye-catching, arresting pictures of maybe still images. I'm not sure we've got moving footage of some of the churches, big churches, completely ablaze. And the semantics matter, Ezra, don't they? You're right to correct me. I did read mass graves somewhere, as you say, unmarked graves, but you can see why using phrases like mass graves parks this semantically in a completely different place and could incite a particular type of reaction. We'll park that. And let's just consider, as you mentioned, the fact that the royal family, the Queen, as head of state for Canada, has been drawn into this, at least from a distance. What's going on there? And why didn't police intervene when statues were being toppled and churches were being set ablaze?
Well, that's the thing. When Queen Victoria was taken down, that wasn't a sneaky thing done in the dead of night. It was in the midday sun. Probably 100 people were involved, ropes. It probably took an hour to do. The police stood by. The only person they arrested was one counter-protester. And you'll see, even in your opening remarks, that the official comment about statues toppled, churches burned, is immediately to go to the narrative of, well, yeah, they're to blame, but please don't get violent. So it's almost like blaming a victim here in terms of blaming the churches. Well, you shouldn't have done that thing 100 years ago. I think that there's a very dangerous game being played by Justin Trudeau and other authorities that are giving moral respect to the iconoclasts here, to people who just want to tear everything down. I believe in reconciliation with Indigenous people. I think the vast majority of Canadians do. But just because Canada might have made mistakes 50, 100, 150 years ago, doesn't mean we have to throw out everything in Canada today. And I think this is going to backfire. Instead of bringing the various races and religions and ethnicities of Canada closer together, I think it's going to divide people. It reminds me of the Black Lives Matter movement. I know that there's some noble ideas underneath it, but it's applying a kind of Marxist theory to separating races and pitting them against each other. I think that burning churches, especially churches on Indian reserves, how the heck does that help an Indian band? If you burn down their church where they get married and funerals and their cycle of life events, I'm worried that this is the Canadian version of Black Lives Matter, which I think makes race relations more toxic. It doesn't reconcile or heal.
Ezra, it will surprise a lot of our viewers who don't, as you, follow Canadian politics and every tick of the culture wars. They'll be familiar with statues being toppled in the United States and even here in the UK. But actually what they've missed, many of them, is the temperature of the culture wars in Canada. And they've been raging for a long time.
Yes, but I think that this particular Indigenous culture war, this Aboriginal issue, I think it's been stoked by Justin Trudeau. And I'm not saying that just because I'm a partisan critic of his. I think he's tried to mimic some of what he sees in the culture wars in the United States, but they don't really apply here. Just like, as you know, Canada was part of the British Empire that helped free the world of slavery. We abolished slavery here more than 200 years ago. So that Black Lives Matter political project in the States can't really take root here in Canada, and maybe not in the UK either, because the history is so different. So I think that as a political scheme, turning the Black Lives Matter critical race model into a Canadian version required making it into an Indigenous story. And I think that this is not helping ordinary Indigenous people either in cities or on reserves. I don't know. I don't think Canada has had this kind of hostility before. I think it's new. I think it's the Canadianization of the woke wars. And I fear it will have the same disastrous effects it's had in the US. No Black community has been improved economically, culturally by these race riots. And I fear that these Indigenous communities in Canada, torching a church on an Indian reserve helps nobody, but it makes a lot of people sad and angry. And unfortunately, some politicians seem to cash in on that.
Ezra Levant from Rebel News. Ezra, really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.